The galaxy had always been a place of beauty, mystery, and danger. It was a vast expanse of stars, worlds, and civilizations stretching beyond comprehension. For millennia, different species rose and fell, each carving out their place in the cosmos. Some built empires that spanned entire star systems. Others were little more than fleeting whispers, leaving nothing but dust in their wake. But none of them, not even the oldest and most powerful races, had ever faced a threat quite like this one. Humanity had always been seen as just another species, ambitious, stubborn, and prone to making mistakes. When they first stumbled onto the galactic stage, the more advanced civilizations dismissed them as nothing more than a curiosity. They were unrefined, their technologies primitive compared to the powers that held dominion over the stars. Yet there was something about them, something they couldn't quite put their fingers on, that made the other species uneasy. Perhaps it was their capacity for growth. Humanity had a relentless drive to push forward, no matter the odds. In a galaxy where millions of species had reached the peak of their civilizations, stagnating and growing complacent in their advanced ways, humans refused to settle. They kept moving, kept evolving, kept challenging the limits of what they could do. And for that reason, there was always an underlying fear, one that had begun to grow louder as humanity's presence became undeniable. But no one truly understood how dangerous humanity could become. Not until it was too late. It all began with a whisper, just a rumor at first. One by one, reports started coming in from different corners of the galaxy. A series of mysterious disappearances. Entire colonies vanishing overnight without a trace. The most advanced surveillance systems on the galaxy couldn't explain it. Military fleets dispatched to investigate were met with empty space, nothing but cold silence. There were no signs of battle, no remnants of destruction. It was as though these places had never existed. The other species in the galaxy thought it was the work of pirates. Raiders, maybe? A new threat to the balance of power. After all, it had happened before. But as the disappearances continued to grow in frequency and scale, it became clear this wasn't a simple case of criminal activity. No one had ever seen anything like it. It wasn't just colonies being wiped out, it was entire worlds. One by one, the once thriving hubs of civilization fell into nothingness. Then came the first real clue, an intercepted transmission. It wasn't much, just a single, frantic message from a fleet of ships sent to investigate one of the missing colonies. They had discovered something terrifying. Before the message cut off, the words "humanity" and "we made a mistake" echoed through the static. That was all. Nothing more. It wasn't much, but it was enough to send shockwaves through the galaxy. Humanity? What did they have to do with this? There was no way the humans were responsible. They weren't capable of something like this, or were they? The questions hung in the air as the galaxy braced itself for answers that would come far too late. A small group of humans, once regarded as little more than pawns in the grand scheme of the galaxy, stood at the heart of this mystery. These were the first humans to leave Earth and venture beyond the stars. They had settled on the edges of the galaxy, far from the ancient empires that had ruled for eons. Here, in the fringes of known space, they had built their own homes, forged their own path, and made their own name. They were not the oldest species nor the most advanced, but they were smart and they were driven. And now they were caught in the midst of something far greater than they ever expected. The whispers were getting louder, the threat more real. In the quiet corners of the galaxy, in the darkest reaches of space, they were starting to hear the truth. Humanity had become something new. They weren't just a species anymore. They were a force. The last few months had been a blur. The human survivors had banded together. Those who hadn't been taken, those who had managed to escape the destruction. They had gathered in secret, desperate to understand what was happening, to find the one thing that could stop it. But every lead they followed, every corner of the galaxy they searched, led them only to more questions. One by one, the galaxy's most powerful leaders were starting to realize what the humans had already figured out. This wasn't a war. It wasn't a rebellion. It was a reckoning. Humanity's rise had triggered something deep within the galaxy. A primal force that had lain dormant for millennia, unnoticed by even the most ancient of species. And now it was waking up. The humans knew that if they didn't act fast, the galaxy would fall. Not to the hands of invaders or outsiders, but to the hands of its own forgotten past. A past that had been erased, hidden, and buried. A past that was now returning with a vengeance. In the human heart, there was something that had always set them apart from the other races. It was a quiet strength, a burning drive to survive and adapt. But this time it wasn't enough. This time they were faced with something far beyond their understanding. They had built themselves up to this point, proud of their achievements, But what lay ahead would test everything they knew about themselves, and everything they were willing to sacrifice. The galaxy's greatest threat wasn't some new alien invader, some conquering horde. It wasn't a plague or a deadly weapon of mass destruction. It was something far worse. It was a truth that would shatter everything. As the humans tried to piece together what had happened, they were being hunted. Not by ships or armies, but by something far more insidious. Their every move was tracked, their every plan compromised. It felt as though the very galaxy itself was turning against them. In their desperation, they reached out for answers, uncovering secrets buried deep within the ancient ruins of forgotten worlds. The further they went, the more they learned, and the more they realized that the galaxy's greatest threat was not a thing but a force tied to the very foundation of life itself. Something buried in the origins of the galaxy, hidden away by those who had come before. The closer they got, the more dangerous it became. There were whispers of a secret alliance, an ancient race that had once ruled the stars but had been erased from history, left to fade into myth. No one knew what happened to them, but the humans had begun to discover their legacy. And in their search, they had awakened something that was never meant to be awakened. The galaxy's greatest threat was not external. It was internal. And it had been waiting for the right moment to return. The humans, with all their ingenuity and determination, had unknowingly triggered the resurgence of a long-forgotten power. A power so vast, so ancient, that even the oldest civilizations could not comprehend its full extent. This power had once shaped the galaxy, but it had been abandoned, locked away until now. And now the galaxy would pay the price. With every passing day, the stakes grew higher. The clock was ticking and there was no going back. The humans were on the edge of something catastrophic, something beyond their control. But they couldn't stop now. Not when they were so close to understanding the truth. As the first signs of the power's awakening began to ripple across the galaxy, the humans realized one chilling fact. They were not fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting for their place in a galaxy that had already decided their fate. And as they prepared for the final confrontation, they had one last question. Was the galaxy's greatest threat something they could destroy, or something they had to join? The answer to that question would change everything. The humans had come this far. But would they make it out alive? Or would they become the next forgotten species to vanish into the darkness? The stars had always been a source of wonder, but now they were a reminder of the vastness of the unknown. The humans, once naive to the true scope of the galaxy, had begun to understand just how small they were in comparison to the ancient, unfathomable forces that had shaped the universe long before their kind had even learned to look up at the night sky. They were not the first to tread the stars, and they certainly would not be the last. But what they had uncovered in their pursuit of answers was something beyond their wildest imaginations, something terrifying. The more they learned, the more they realized just how much they still didn't know. It was as if the entire galaxy had been built on lies, and each new revelation only deepened the mystery. The first signs had been subtle. At first, the humans had thought it was just a coincidence. An odd series of disappearances, strange transmissions, unsettling reports from distant colonies. They were always isolated, distant pockets of civilization, far away from the bustling heart of galactic politics and trade. These worlds were quiet, forgotten by the powerful empires that ruled the stars. But the disappearances didn't stop. They grew. And what was even more unnerving was that no one could explain why. Not even the oldest species, who had lived for thousands of years, could provide any answers. They had seen wars, natural disasters, even genocides. But this was different. It was as if someone, or something, was deliberately erasing entire worlds from existence. No evidence, no signs of struggle. Just gone. The first group of humans to investigate this strange phenomenon had been a small, experimental team sent on what was supposed to be a routine reconnaissance mission. They had expected to find some sort of natural disaster or perhaps a rogue faction of pirates operating in the area. But what they uncovered was beyond anything they had imagined. They found a planet, empty but for the remnants of its population. Houses, factories, entire cities, all abandoned. But there were no signs of evacuation. No burned-out hulls of starships. No debris. Just nothing. As if the people had simply disappeared into thin air. The only clue they had found was a strange artifact, something buried deep in the rubble of a collapsed building. It was a stone, carved with symbols unlike anything the humans had ever seen, ancient and alien. The artifact was the key. But to what? No one could say for sure. As they examined the object, strange things began to happen. Equipment started malfunctioning. Communication systems began to sputter and fail. The air seemed to grow heavy, as if the very space around them was being altered. The team had been forced to leave quickly, their ship barely able to escape the planet's atmosphere. The last transmission they sent back to their command was garbled, but there was a single message that came through clear as day: "We made a mistake." And then the transmission stopped. The ship was never heard from again. That was the moment the humans realized something had changed. Something ancient, something powerful, had been set in motion. But what? The artifact, though, was only the first clue. The more the humans delved into their research, the more they discovered that there were more artifacts, scattered across the galaxy, hidden in the most remote, forgotten places. Each one was tied to a different civilization, all lost to time. The clues pointed to something bigger, something far older than the humans could comprehend. These artifacts weren't just objects. They were keys to unlocking a power that had long been sealed away. But who had sealed it away? And why? The answers were elusive. Even the most advanced species in the galaxy, with their centuries of knowledge and their access to ancient archives, could not decipher the meaning behind these artifacts. The more the humans uncovered, the more they felt the weight of something pressing down on them. A shadow, ever looming, threatening to consume everything they had worked for. And then, things started happening. It began with strange occurrences in the human colonies. People started disappearing. Whole families, entire villages, gone in the blink of an eye. It wasn't the same as before. This time there were signs of violence. The air was thick with tension. Whispers of the awakening began circulating through the human settlements. No one knew exactly what it meant, but they all felt it, an undeniable sense of dread. It was clear that the galaxy was on the verge of something catastrophic. The humans had become aware of something they weren't supposed to know. They had uncovered the long-forgotten legacy of a species older than the stars themselves, a species whose existence had been erased from history. This species had once ruled the galaxy, shaping it in their image. But they had disappeared long ago, leaving behind only fragments of their existence. Or so they thought. The more the humans learned, the more they began to realize that this species hadn't disappeared at all. They had simply withdrawn. Hidden themselves away, deep within the heart of the galaxy, waiting for the right moment to return. And that moment was now. The galaxy had always been home to great civilizations, but none had ever been as powerful, as ancient, as the one that was about to reawaken. The humans had triggered something ancient and terrible. The artifacts they had found, the clues they had uncovered, had been part of a plan. A plan that had been set in motion millennia ago. The question was, why had this power been sealed away in the first place? The answer, it seemed, was tied to the core of the galaxy itself. The ancient species, in their quest for power, had discovered something that should have never been discovered. They had learned the truth about the universe, a truth that was so vast, so incomprehensible, that it drove them to madness. This knowledge was dangerous, too dangerous to be wielded by any one species, no matter how advanced they were. So, the galaxy's greatest powers had done the only thing they could think of: they had sealed the knowledge away. They had hidden it in plain sight, scattered across the stars, locked inside these strange artifacts. They had buried the truth, hoping that no one would ever find it. But now the humans had found it. The galaxy's oldest civilizations were already beginning to feel the tremors of what was coming. They knew that they could not stand against the awakening of this ancient power. The humans, however, had a unique advantage. They were not bound by the same rules that had governed the other species for eons. They were free from the ancient codes, unburdened by the history and rituals of the past. They were fresh, adaptable, willing to take risks the others couldn't even imagine. But the humans were also vulnerable. They had no idea what they were dealing with. The truth they had uncovered was like a disease, spreading through their ranks, tearing apart their unity. Old alliances were beginning to crumble, trust was in short supply, and whispers of betrayal were everywhere. The very foundation of the human effort to uncover the truth was beginning to unravel. And then there was the presence. In the depths of space, the force that had been dormant for so long was stirring. It was more than a presence. It was a consciousness, ancient and unfathomable, stretching out its tendrils toward the galaxy. It was watching, waiting, and the humans were no longer the hunters. They had become the hunted. The tension in the galaxy was palpable. The once proud species that had ruled the stars were no longer sure of their place in the universe. Were they still the masters of the galaxy, or had they become relics of a forgotten time, standing in the way of something far more powerful? The humans, for all their ingenuity and resilience, were caught in the middle of a battle they didn't fully understand. They had uncovered something that was never meant to be found, and now they were facing the consequences. And all the while, the galaxy's greatest threat loomed ever closer. There was no going back. The pieces had already been set in motion and the clock was ticking. The humans had to make a choice, stand against the force that was rising or join it. But the truth was, no one knew what would happen if they chose to stand. Would they survive the storm that was coming? Or would they too disappear, forgotten like so many before them? Only time would tell. But one thing was certain, the galaxy was never going to be the same again. The final battle was coming. The humans had no idea how they would survive or if they even could. But there was one thing they knew for sure. They had awakened something far greater than themselves, and now they would have to face the consequences. The tension in the galaxy had become unbearable. Every passing day, the hum of fear grew louder, reverberating through every corner of the human colonies. People spoke in hushed tones, their eyes darting nervously over their shoulders, as if they could feel the presence of something watching them. The artifacts, the ancient relics scattered across the stars, had become more than just pieces of history. They had become symbols of doom, each one a ticking clock, counting down to a moment no one could predict. The humans had tried to prepare. They had called their brightest minds, their strongest leaders, their most capable warriors all together. But the more they learned, the more they understood just how little they truly knew. The galaxy was on the brink of collapse, and every plan they made, every strategy they devised, felt like a futile attempt to hold back a storm that was already here. The whispers of rebellion had begun, first from those who had lost everything, worlds swallowed by an unknown force, entire fleets disappearing without a trace. The fear was palpable and it was spreading like wildfire. Even the most respected leaders, the ones who had built the foundation of human civilization among the stars, were starting to crack under the pressure. They had no answers, only more questions. And then there were the others, the ones who had always known the truth, the ones who had tried to warn the humans before it was too late. They were the old species, the ones who had once wielded the knowledge of the galaxy's greatest power. They were the ones who had sealed it away, hidden it in the farthest reaches of space, hoping that no one would ever find it. But now they were coming out of the shadows, their faces filled with the same terror the humans were beginning to feel. They too had been unable to stop the awakening. It was inevitable, they said, and there was no escaping it. The Council of the Old Ones, the most powerful beings the humans had ever encountered, had gathered in secret. Their pale faces were etched with ancient wisdom, but beneath their calm exteriors, their eyes betrayed their fear. They knew what was coming. They had seen it before. They had lived through the rise and fall of countless civilizations, and they had hoped, desperately, that this time would be different. But it wasn't. And as the humans watched, helpless, the cracks began to show. Communication between the colonies began to falter. Systems that had once been reliable now flickering, sparking with interference. More strange transmissions came through, incoherent and distorted, but still carrying the same message: we are coming. The human fleet, once a symbol of hope, was now a symbol of desperation. Their ships moved in formation, patrolling the outskirts of known space, trying to maintain some semblance of control. But it wasn't enough. The feeling of something approaching, something immense and unknowable, was undeniable. Each crew member felt it deep in their bones, a sense of foreboding that never left them. They didn't know what they were facing. Every scan, every attempt to probe the unknown regions of space, returned nothing but static. The darkness was impenetrable and it was moving closer. In the heart of it all was the mysterious figure who had appeared among the humans. A being who was not quite human, but not quite like anything else the galaxy had ever seen. No one knew where they had come from or how they had arrived, but their knowledge was unmatched. They had been the one to uncover the ancient texts, to understand the true meaning behind the artifacts. But even they couldn't explain what was happening. All they could do was warn the humans, prepare for what's to come. But what could they prepare for? How could anyone be ready for something so vast, so all-consuming? The first major strike came when an entire human colony, nestled in a distant star system, went silent. Communications cut off, and when a rescue team arrived they found nothing. No signs of battle, no signs of life. Just a ghost town, buildings intact but not a soul in sight. It was the first real sign of what was happening. The enemy wasn't just attacking. It was erasing. Wiping entire populations from existence, as if they had never been there in the first place. The humans tried to rally. They brought in every resource they could muster, desperate to fight back, to figure out what had been set in motion. But the more they pushed forward, the more they realized how ill-prepared they truly were. The galaxy wasn't just on the brink of war, it was teetering on the edge of something far worse: oblivion. Then came the second strike. This time it was a human flagship, one of the most advanced ships ever built, vanishing without a trace. A fleet of hundreds of ships, sent to investigate a distress signal from an unknown source, had disappeared in the same fashion. No distress beacon. No debris. Just gone. The silence was deafening. Fear spread like a contagion. People began to question everything they had known. Were they alone in the galaxy? Had they always been? Or had they been blind to the forces that surrounded them? The Council of the Old Ones offered no answers. They only spoke in riddles, warning the humans that time was running out. They had already lived through too many cycles of destruction, they said, and this one would be no different. The humans, desperate, reached out to the only other ally they had, the alien species who had once been their enemies. They had fought them in the wars of the past, each side believing they were the rightful rulers of the galaxy. But now, faced with the rising threat, they had no choice but to put aside their differences. In the quiet of space, the fleets of humans and their former enemies joined together, their ships forming a tenuous alliance. The tension between them was thick enough to slice with a knife, but there was no time for old grudges. They had no choice but to fight together. The final confrontation was drawing near. The pieces were all in place. The stage was set. The tension in the command room was unbearable as the humans and their allies prepared for the inevitable. The final battle. They didn't know what to expect, but they knew it would be nothing short of catastrophic. The galaxy was about to witness the rise of something far greater than anything they had ever imagined. All they could do now was wait. The command room was silent as the fleet prepared to move forward. Outside the viewports, the dark expanse of space stretched endlessly, the void seeming to grow thicker with every passing second. All eyes were on the screens as the alliance of humans and their former enemies synced their systems. The ships, massive and formidable, stood ready for the battle that everyone knew could change the course of history. But something had changed in the last few hours. The quiet hum of anticipation had shifted into something more insidious, an unsettled feeling that no one could shake. Every soldier, every officer, every strategist felt it. There was an uneasy sense that they were not about to face a battle, but something else entirely. Are we ready? The question came from Captain Elena Ria, one of the few who had kept a clear head throughout the mounting chaos. She stood at the center of the command room, eyes scanning the readouts on the screens in front of her. There was no immediate response, just the clicking of keyboards and soft murmurs as the crew double-checked their equipment. But Elena's instincts told her something wasn't right. She had seen it before. When things seemed too calm, too orderly, there was always something lurking just beyond the horizon. The unknown. And the unknown, she knew, was often far worse than they could imagine. "Commander," a voice crackled over the comms. It was Lieutenant Jalen, one of the intelligence officers. "We've received something. A new signal. It's different." Elena narrowed her eyes. "Different how?" "It's not a distress signal. It's not anything we've seen before. It's almost like," he hesitated, "like it's calling us. Or more like it's drawing us in." A shiver ran down Elena's spine. She glanced at the tactical map, her mind racing. This was the moment they had prepared for, the time to face whatever force had been quietly tearing apart the galaxy. But now, a new piece of the puzzle had emerged, something far more dangerous than they could have ever expected. "Where is the signal coming from?" Elena asked, voice calm but her mind now in overdrive. "It's coming from deep within the wasteland sector," Jalen responded. The wasteland. A part of the galaxy no one dared to venture into, a place so inhospitable and unknown that even the bravest pilots avoided it. No one had ventured there in centuries, not since the first galaxy-wide war. It was said to be cursed, abandoned, forgotten. But if this was truly where the signal was coming from, "Pull up the coordinates," Elena commanded, her voice now sharp, her military instincts kicking in. She knew this was a turning point. This could be the key to understanding everything. Or it could be their undoing. The map shifted, and the coordinates were displayed on the screen. Elena's heart skipped a beat when she saw them. It was a place no one should have been able to access, let alone transmit a signal from. The wasteland was not just a dangerous sector, it was the location of the first of the artifacts they had discovered. The one they had found in the ruins of a long-forgotten civilization. The one that had set all of this in motion. "This is..." Elena trailed off, not knowing what to say. She felt the weight of the realization hit her. The artifacts, the ones they had thought were mere remnants of a dead race, had always been the key. But now it seemed that they weren't just artifacts at all. They were the catalyst. "This changes everything," she muttered, more to herself than to anyone else in the room. "Captain," Jalen's voice interrupted her thoughts, "we're also receiving a transmission. It's from the Old Ones. They're requesting an urgent meeting." Elena's heart sank. The old ones. The ancient beings who had once sealed away the galaxy's greatest threat, who had vanished into obscurity, reappearing only when they feared that something worse than even they could imagine was about to awaken. If they were involved now, it meant the stakes had escalated beyond anything she had anticipated. "Patch it through," Elena ordered. The room went silent again as the screen flickered to life. The face that appeared was familiar yet unsettling, an old one, its ancient eyes hollow and tired, with the weight of centuries of fear behind them. "You've found it, haven't you?" the old one said, its voice barely above a whisper. "The signal. The one from the wasteland." Elena nodded, though the ancient being couldn't see it. "What is it? What's happening?" The old one hesitated, as though weighing the consequences of speaking the truth. "You don't understand," it began slowly. "The artifacts are not just relics. They are the locks that held the galaxy's greatest threat at bay. A force so powerful, it can erase entire civilizations from existence. And now you've unwittingly unlocked it." Elena's mind raced. "You said the old one sealed it away. Why wasn't it destroyed?" "It couldn't be destroyed," the old one replied, voice heavy with regret. "It was too dangerous. If it had been destroyed, the galaxy itself might have unraveled. So we did the only thing we could, we sealed it away. But now, the signal you're receiving? It's coming from the core of that very seal. Then what's coming for us?" Elena asked, dread creeping into her voice. The old one's gaze softened with sorrow. "You've already seen it. The colony that vanished. The fleets that disappeared. That's just the beginning. What you're up against isn't an enemy. It's something far worse. It's a force that consumes and reshapes everything it touches, turning it into its own. You can't fight it. You can't kill it." A chill ran through Elena. She turned toward her officers, each of them standing in rapt attention. What had they gotten themselves into? What were they facing that even the old ones couldn't defeat? "But why is it awake now?" she asked, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Why now?" The old one closed its eyes as if haunted by memories too painful to relive. "Because the time has come for the galaxy to either evolve or perish. And the artifact you found wasn't just a key, it was a signal to it. The moment you touched it, the awakening began." The transmission cut out before Elena could ask more. The silence that followed was deafening. The entire room felt suffocating. Her heart was racing now, her mind spinning as the weight of the revelation settled over her like a cloud. And then, as if the universe itself were mocking their preparations, the first of the fleet's sensors began to flare. The deep, unnerving hum of their ship's warning systems cut through the silence. "Captain," a voice crackled through the comms, "we've just detected a massive gravitational disturbance. It's coming from the wasteland. And it's heading straight toward us." Elena's breath caught in her throat. The battle had already begun. But they were not prepared for this. The end was closer than they had ever imagined. The alarms blared, piercing the tense silence that had enveloped the command room. Elena's breath caught in her throat as she stared at the now glowing readouts on the console, her heart pounding in time with the flashing red lights. The gravitational anomaly from the wasteland was growing larger, drawing closer. But it wasn't just the disturbance that sent a shiver down her spine. It was the sheer force of it, the way it seemed to push against everything the fleet had prepared for. "We have no time," one of the officers shouted, her voice strained with panic. "The gravitational pull is too strong. If we don't move now, we'll be pulled in." Elena turned toward the window, her eyes locked on the vast expanse of space. The stars seemed to bend and warp under the weight of the disturbance, like a black hole tearing apart the very fabric of reality. The force was like nothing they had ever encountered, a destructive power far beyond anything the galaxy had ever known. "Activate the shields," Elena barked. "Prepare for evasive maneuvers." The crew scrambled, their hands flying over controls, their movements sharp with urgency. But even as the ship hummed to life, Elena knew it wouldn't be enough. The signal from the wasteland wasn't just some random anomaly. It was the force that had caused the galaxy's greatest disappearances, the force that had wiped out entire civilizations. And now it was headed straight for them. Elena closed her eyes for a brief moment, summoning all the strength she could muster. This wasn't just a fight for survival anymore, it was a fight to save everything they had ever known. She couldn't let the fear take over. "Not now." "Captain," a voice interrupted her thoughts. It was Jalen, his face pale and full of dread. "The signal, it's changing. It's evolving. It's like it's communicating with something." Elena's stomach dropped. "What do you mean, evolving?" Before Jalen could answer, the ship jolted, throwing everyone off balance. A wave of heat rushed through the room as the shields began to crackle and flicker. The stars outside the window twisted unnaturally, their light flickering and dimming, like candles about to be snuffed out by an invisible hand. Elena gripped the edge of her console, her knuckles white. What's happening to the shields? They're not holding, a technician shouted. The energy readings are off the charts. We're being overwhelmed. The gravitational force is. Another violent tremor rocked the ship, and Elena's breath caught in her throat. She didn't need to be told that the shields had failed. Whatever was coming from the wasteland, it was too much. It was too powerful. All hands brace for impact. Elena shouted into the comms, but her words barely seemed to matter anymore. The reality was crashing in faster than anyone could process. The lights flickered and then went out, leaving the room in total darkness. In that moment, Elena felt an eerie stillness settle over her, as though the universe itself was holding its breath. She reached out instinctively, finding Jalen's shoulder in the dark. "What are we going to do?" Jalen asked, his voice trembling with fear. Elena didn't answer right away. Her mind was racing. There had to be a way. She couldn't just sit there and wait for the inevitable. They had to fight back. But how? How could they stand against a force that had shattered entire fleets, entire worlds? Then, just as quickly as the darkness had fallen, the room was flooded with blinding light. A violent explosion of sound and color seemed to tear through space itself, shaking the very bones of the ship. Elena slammed her eyes shut, trying to shield herself from the overwhelming intensity. When the light finally dimmed and the noise faded, Elena opened her eyes again, her heart racing in her chest. The room had changed. The walls seemed to ripple, warping and distorting as if the very structure of the ship was bending under the weight of some unseen pressure. And in the center of the room, standing as though it had always been there, was a figure. It was tall, towering over the crew, its form a strange amalgamation of organic and metallic. The figure was unlike anything they had ever encountered, its surface constantly shifting, its eyes glowing with an unnatural intensity. It radiated power, an ancient and malevolent force that seemed to twist the very air around it. And yet, at the same time, there was a strange calmness about it, a calmness that sent an icy chill down Elena's spine. The figure spoke, its voice deep and resonant, vibrating through the walls of the room. "You have awakened me." Elena's breath caught in her throat. This was it. This was the source of the signal. The force that had been wreaking havoc across the galaxy. But what was it? What was this thing that stood before them? What are you? Elena's voice was barely a whisper, filled with a mixture of awe and terror. The figure tilted its head slightly as if considering her question. "I am the one who was forgotten. The one who was sealed away. The one you call the greatest threat." The room was silent for a long moment, as the crew struggled to comprehend what they were hearing. But Elena's mind was already racing. This wasn't just an ancient being, it was something far worse. It was the force that had been consuming everything in its path. And now it was here, standing before them. "I am not your enemy," the figure continued, its voice calm, almost soothing. "I am merely a remnant of what once was. A remnant of an ancient power that can reshape the galaxy. A power that you awakened." Elena's heart raced. The words were incomprehensible, yet they were crystal clear at the same time. This creature, this thing, was the catalyst. It wasn't here to destroy. It was here to remake. "You think you have control," the figure said, its voice laced with a strange kind of sadness. "But you do not. You were always meant to awaken me, to bring me back. Your kind has always been drawn to the unknown, to the power that lies just beyond your reach. But in doing so, you've doomed yourselves." Elena's stomach twisted. The weight of its words pressed down on her chest, suffocating her. But even as the truth sank in, another thought began to take root in her mind, something that didn't make sense, something that didn't align with everything they had been told. "If you're the greatest threat," she said slowly, her voice trembling with uncertainty, "then why did you leave us the artifacts? Why did you make us find them?" The figure paused, its glowing eyes locking with hers. "Because I could not act on my own. I needed you, the ones who would reach for the stars, to be the key. Without you, I would have remained sealed forever. I needed the galaxy to come to me." And then, in a voice that shook the very foundations of the ship, it added, "But I am not the only one who was sealed away." Elena's blood ran cold. The room seemed to spin as the weight of the words hit her like a physical blow. There was more. There was something worse, something far more dangerous than this being. "You think you're the greatest threat?" she whispered, the fear clawing at her throat. "What's worse than you?" The figure's expression darkened. "I was merely the guardian. What is coming now will reshape everything you know. and there is nothing you can do to stop it. The ship began to shake violently again, as though the very fabric of space itself was being torn apart. Elena's vision blurred, and in the distance she saw the flickering outline of a second figure. Dark, towering, incomprehensible. The true enemy had only just arrived. And it was far worse than anything they could have ever imagined. The room trembled under the force of the second figure's arrival. Its presence loomed larger than life, an overwhelming force of darkness and power, something far older than any of the crew could possibly comprehend. Elena's heart pounded as her mind tried to process the enormity of what was unfolding in front of them. The first figure had already cast a shadow of dread, but now the new presence felt like the inevitable end of everything they had known. She stumbled back, barely able to keep her balance as the ship groaned under the strain. The walls shook and the lights flickered, casting brief, haunting shadows around them. Jalen gripped her arm, his fingers cold with fear, but she barely noticed. Her eyes were fixed on the figure, her pulse thudding in her ears. The second figure stepped forward, its form even more distorted than the first, an endless abyss of swirling darkness and jagged edges. It had no face, no distinguishable features, only an unrelenting void that seemed to consume the very light around it. The temperature in the room dropped, and the air became thick with an unnatural heaviness. Elena tried to take a breath, but it felt as though the very act was being stolen from her. "You've awakened him," the first figure spoke, its voice now distant, almost lost under the weight of the presence before them. "And now the true reckoning begins." The second figure raised a hand, a gesture of authority, and suddenly Elena's vision was flooded with images, flashes of impossible landscapes, alien structures, and the unsettling feeling of something vast watching them. It was as if the very fabric of the galaxy itself was being peeled away to reveal truths that had been hidden for eons. "The one you called the greatest threat," the second figure spoke, its voice a low, gravelly rumble that reverberated through the ship, "was never meant to be freed. He is merely the herald. A harbinger of something far more dangerous. I am the reckoning." The word sent a chill down Elena's spine. Her mind raced as she tried to grasp the magnitude of what they were facing. This wasn't just a battle for survival. This wasn't just about saving the galaxy. This was something far more personal. Something that cut to the heart of everything humanity had fought for and lost. "The artifacts you uncovered," the second figure continued, "were not placed there by me. They were left by those who understood the danger you now face. They were meant to lead you to me, to this moment, so that you would have the choice." Elena's breath hitched in her throat. What choice? The figure's absence of a face was unsettling, but its voice conveyed a kind of dark finality that sent a shiver through her. The choice of destruction or ascension. The galaxy as it is, or a new beginning, born from the ashes of the old. Elena's mind spun with confusion. This wasn't what she expected. They had come seeking answers, seeking a way to stop the unknown threat that had decimated entire worlds. But now, standing before them, was a being that seemed to promise not only destruction but something else. A choice, a power that could reshape the galaxy itself. "What do you mean by ascension?" Elena asked, her voice shaking but determined to find some clarity in the chaos. The figure raised its hand again, and a dark vortex opened in front of them, pulling the air out of the room as though it was the very breath of the galaxy being siphoned away. Images flashed again, terrifying, beautiful, strange. It was as if the entire history of the universe was playing out before her eyes. Civilizations rising and falling, stars being born and dying, life evolving in ways she could barely comprehend. "Ascension is the process by which you become part of something greater than yourself," the figure said, its voice echoing. "It is not just evolution. It is a transformation that will turn you into a being beyond your current limitations. But it is also a sacrifice. Your old selves will be lost in the process, your humanity gone. And in exchange you will become one with the void. One with the cosmos." Elena's stomach churned. The thought of losing everything she had known, everything she was, for the sake of becoming something else, was unimaginable. It was tempting, in a way, this promise of transcendence, of becoming something greater than humanity had ever been. But it came at a price she wasn't sure she was willing to pay. "No," she whispered, her voice low but firm. "I won't do it. I won't give up who we are." The figure's response was a slow, almost mournful laugh, like the sound of the universe itself lamenting the inevitable fate of all things. "You have no choice. The decision has already been made. It is the price of survival." Suddenly the entire ship shuddered violently, throwing everyone off balance. Elena grasped at the nearest console to steady herself, her mind racing. There had to be a way out. There had to be something they could do. They couldn't just give in. Not after everything they had fought for. Not after all the sacrifices. Jalen's voice broke through her thoughts. Captain, look. She turned to see him pointing at the view screen. The stars outside the ship were changing. Warping, twisting, bending under the influence of the force that now held them all in its grip. But something was different. The light from distant stars began to shift, coalescing into patterns, forming shapes that were unmistakable. They weren't just stars. They were ships, thousands of them, each one different, each one ancient, and each one radiating power. Elena's heart skipped a beat. Are those? Yes, Jalen said, his voice filled with disbelief. The lost fleets. They've returned. The moment those words left his mouth, a crackling energy surged through the ship. The force that had once seemed so overwhelming, so impossible to fight, was now being met with resistance. The fleets, once lost, now returned, began to align with the ship, creating a powerful network of energy that pushed against the darkness. The fleets, they're not just returning, Elena murmured, the realization hitting her with the force of a lightning strike. They're fighting back. It was as though the galaxy itself was answering the call. For the first time, Elena saw the strength that humanity had never truly understood they had. The strength of unity, the strength of those who refused to give in to the darkness. The second figure, watching with growing anger, let out a howl that shook the very core of the ship. You think you can resist this? It boomed. You think your fleets can stop the inevitable? The dark vortex began to shrink, but Elena knew this was only the beginning. The fleets, the collective might of every civilization that had ever been lost, were returning not just to fight but to defend everything they had ever stood for. Then Elena felt it, a surge of power like nothing she had ever experienced. It wasn't coming from the fleets. It wasn't coming from the dark figure. It was coming from within her. A power raw and untapped, surged through her veins. The artifact she had held onto, no, it wasn't just an artifact. It was a key. A key to the energy that had been hidden in the depths of the galaxy, waiting for someone brave enough to unlock it. She stepped forward, her eyes locked on the second figure. This isn't your galaxy anymore, she said, her voice filled with newfound strength. This is ours. And we won't let you take it. The dark figure snarled, but Elena was already feeling the power coursing through her. The fleets, the artifacts, the power of humanity, it was all coming together. The ship's systems hummed in harmony with the energy that surrounded them. The darkness began to retreat, not with a whimper, but with a scream that echoed across the galaxy, as though even the void itself was being torn apart. The second figure disappeared in a burst of light, its power fading with it. The room, once filled with oppressive darkness, now seemed to pulse with life. Elena's breath slowed, her pulse returning to normal as the weight of the moment sank in. The galaxy was safe. But they had changed. The decision to fight had come at a cost, but it had been worth it. As the ships from the lost fleets faded back into the stars, Elena looked around at her crew, her family. They had survived. They had done what no one thought possible. The future of the galaxy was uncertain, but one thing was clear: humanity's greatest strength wasn't in their weapons or their ships. It was in their will to survive, their refusal to bow to the darkness, and their unbreakable belief that together, they could overcome anything. As the ship sailed into the stars, the crew knew that the galaxy was theirs to protect, theirs to rebuild, and theirs to shape. And for the first time in a long time, they weren't afraid. The galaxy had been on the brink of annihilation, teetering between the forces of a dark, insurmountable power and the last flickering embers of resistance. And now, after everything, after all the battles, the treacherous journeys, the choices that had torn apart the crew's bonds, the moment had arrived. Elena stood before the vast expanse of the view screen, the stars a quiet witness to everything that had come before. The mysterious figure was gone, but there was still a lingering weight in the air, a sense of unfinished business. It was strange, almost surreal. The darkness that had once seemed so unstoppable was now nothing more than a memory, banished back to the depths of the cosmos. Yet the victory was not a simple one. The power the crew had tapped into, the strange artifact that had begun this journey, was not something that could be ignored. It left them all changed. Elena felt it in her bones. There was no going back. Whatever this had unlocked within her was still there, pulsing beneath her skin like a secret she couldn't quite understand. But she knew one thing: she wasn't alone in this. The crew, despite the dangers they had faced and the sacrifices they had made, stood behind her. Each one of them had been tested, pushed beyond limits they never thought possible. But here they were, still standing. "Captain," Jalen's voice was steady but still thick with emotion, "what now?" Elena turned toward him. His face was tired, worn, but there was a spark in his eyes, a glimmer of hope. "We rebuild," she said softly, her voice carrying the weight of their shared journey. "We take what we've learned, what we've lost, and we make sure that no one ever forgets the price of freedom. The galaxy won't be the same, Jalen, but it doesn't have to be. We'll shape it into something better. Something worth fighting for." A soft hum filled the room as the ship's systems began to stabilize, the warning lights now blinking in reassuring patterns. The distant stars outside seemed more vibrant now, their light less distant and more personal. They weren't just points of fire in the sky anymore. They were the lifeblood of the universe, and it was theirs to protect. Behind her, the crew gathered, the collective sense of unity stronger than it had ever been. Elena felt something shift within her, a power, a responsibility that had been thrust upon her in the most unexpected of ways. But it wasn't just her burden to carry. It was theirs as a team. She looked at Jalen, then at the others. Each one of them had played a part in the survival of the galaxy. Each one of them had faced darkness in its truest form, and had chosen to stand against it. "Do you think we're ready?" Elena asked, her voice almost a whisper. "We have to be," Jalen replied, stepping forward. "We've come this far. We know what's out there now, and we know what we're up against. We can't go back to how things were before. We have to keep pushing forward. For those who didn't make it." The words hung in the air, heavy but necessary. The crew had lost so much. Friends, comrades, entire worlds had been destroyed. But their sacrifice had not been in vain. They had reached the edge of extinction and had returned victorious, not because they were the strongest or the most powerful, but because they refused to surrender. Elena nodded. "Then we keep moving forward. We rebuild what's been lost, we protect those who remain, and we keep pushing back the darkness. No one is going to take this galaxy from us." As she spoke, the ship's engines began to hum with purpose, the system stabilizing as the coordinates for the next destination flashed before her eyes. There was so much to do. There were new alliances to forge, new threats to face, and new mysteries to solve. The war was over, but the journey was far from finished. The crew began to move about, preparing the ship for the long journey ahead. The tension that had gripped the air began to dissipate, replaced by a renewed sense of purpose. They were ready for whatever came next. But Elena couldn't shake the feeling that something still lingered. Something was out there waiting. The artifact, the power they had uncovered, the knowledge they had gained, it was all a part of something bigger. A puzzle that was only just beginning to reveal its pieces. A voice crackled through the comms, snapping Elena out of her thoughts. "Captain, you might want to see this." Jalen looked at her, his expression wary but hopeful. "What is it?" Elena followed him to the control panel. A new signal had appeared on the ship's radar, faint at first, but growing stronger with each passing moment. It was an anomaly. A signal unlike anything they had encountered before. The coordinates were unknown, and it was moving at an alarming speed. "Not again," Elena muttered under her breath, the weight of the words sinking in. "What now?" "Looks like someone's coming," Jalen said. "And they're not exactly friendly." The crew gathered around as Elena activated the comms. A burst of static filled the room, followed by a voice that sent a chill down her spine. The voice was distorted, as if coming from across time and space. "We are the keepers. We've been watching. You've come too close. This isn't your galaxy anymore. You've awakened things that were never meant to be." Elena's hand tightened around the console, her jaw clenched. "Who are you?" The voice continued, growing louder with each word. "We are the ones who will stop you. The ones who will ensure that this galaxy stays in its rightful place. You cannot undo what's been done." The transmission cut off abruptly, leaving a heavy silence hanging in the room. The crew exchanged looks of confusion and unease. No one spoke. The weight of the moment was too much to bear. Jalen's voice broke the silence. "We've only just begun, haven't we?" Elena's mind raced, her thoughts spinning with questions. Who were these keepers? What did they mean by, "This isn't your galaxy anymore"? And more importantly, how had they known what the crew had discovered? The mysteries were compounding, growing larger with every passing second. She turned to face her crew. "We're not finished here. Not by a long shot. If there's one thing we've learned, it's that the galaxy isn't done testing us. But we won't back down. We'll face whatever comes next. Together." As the crew prepared for the unknown, Elena took one last look at the stars. This had been the beginning of something far greater than any of them had ever imagined. The galaxy, the vast expanse of space, was full of secrets. Some dark, some wondrous. But one thing was certain. Humanity had proven that even in the face of the unimaginable, they would rise. And no force, no matter how ancient or powerful, could extinguish their will to survive. The journey wasn't over. It was only just beginning. The stars were silent witnesses to the courage of those who dared to face the unknown. And for Elena and her crew, the greatest threat had only just begun to reveal its true face. And so, with hearts full of uncertainty but unwavering resolve, they set course for the next chapter in their journey. Whatever the universe threw at them, they would face it together.